Goodness, thanks for coming.
Yeah, thank you very much for coming.
My name is Richard Foster. I'm, for my sins, one of the strange aquatic life in the goldfish bowl of rock and roll, the music journalist. I write for the Quietus and Louder Than War and a bunch of others. I also work at a venue called Worm in Rotterdam. I'm the PR and communications manager there. It's an alternative venue sited in the centre of Rotterdam. And, of course, very happy to be back at MENT, a wonderful festival, one of the best. And I wanted to start, actually, to try and draw a parallel with MENT and our esteemed guest, Marianne Hobbs from the BBC, from XFM.
That's a luxury adjective.
Broadcaster, DJ, curator, artist, champion of new music would be, I think, the umbrella that we can use to cover all your activities. But I wanted to quickly just mention MENT, because I think, as I said, there are parallels between what Marianne does and what MENT does, which is MENT sort of acts as a sort of a binding agent for the region, if you will, between the Balkans and Central and East Central Europe. And it's also a place where people come together and they're able then to discover music and to discover other people who are interested in music, and then thereby export the ideas and the sort of the results of the weekend to other parts. And effectively, that's what I always see Marianne Hobbs doing as well, being this hive of activity that then pushes out ideas for you to all to pick up and to run with. And one thing I wanted to start with Marianne was the idea that you would see music, much like MENT, as a force for the good, effectively. That's the main thing, would you say, in your career? The idea that it being a progressive force.
Absolutely, yeah. My story's quite an interesting one, actually, because I grew up in a tiny little village in the north of England. And when I was a little kid, my dad banned all music from the house. I wasn't officially allowed to have any music at all in the house, but of course, that didn't stop me buying records. But music was a pretty exotic commodity when I was a little kid. You used to have to go to the local toy shop, which was called Mia's Toy Shop. I remember it very well. And save all the money that you'd made doing paper rounds and milk rounds and, weeding for people in their gardens. Lay your money down, and you would wait 9 weeks for a record that you'd ordered to arrive at the shop. But as I say, I used to hide them in my sock drawer, hoping that my dad wouldn't find them. But invariably, he would find the records and he would smash them up. And the only thing that he never found was a little transistor radio that I had, which was about as big as a can of tuna fish. And I used to lay in bed when I was a little girl with the covers pulled all the way over the top of my head, with this tiny little radio in my hand, scrolling across the dial of this radio, looking for a DJ called John Peel, who I had found by complete freak of accident in the middle of the night exploring. And I guess for me, Peel always stood at what I perceived to be a gateway to another universe. It was a virtual world in every sense. There wasn't a tangible world around me in any way that I could see that replicated what Peel was doing. But for me, he was just a great beacon of hope. And he seemed to suggest that this alternate universe existed somewhere and that I could find it. And I suppose I spent the rest of my life trying to reach it, you know.
What was it about the music that you played? Because you're also well known for bringing experimental and what you could see as challenging music to people. It's not, things like Colin Stetson, which you're a champion of, it's not something that, you'd immediately, listen to in daytime radio or something, is it? It's not that kind of music. What was it about that particular kind of music that John Peel was playing that was appealing to you, do you think?
I think what I understood very quickly about John Peel was that he played such a rich diversity of music, and he didn't really have any sense of boundary whatsoever. So that taught me a lot at a very, very early age. And I also understood, listening to his program, that I wasn't going to love every single piece of music that he played, but I was really grateful that he was presenting to me this massive diversity of sound. It was like a rainforest of sound that he was broadcasting. And I understood the value of the fact that in spite of, you know, my own personal taste, and that I may hate a piece of music that he'd played, I really understood the principle of putting it out there. And to this day, I feel the same way. I feel I don't expect everybody to love what it is that I do, or not every single piece of music that I play, but I feel it's really important to give that kind of platform to music that you really care about and that you really believe in, you know.
Is that because it also seems to me that you were very committed I mean, obviously, because of the idea that of something being taken away from you at an early age means that you want it more, don't you? But you know, from what we can read of your early life, I mean, you went to live in a van.
I did.
Yeah, and it was a case of you've been committed to music from the beginning, haven't you? It's from living in a van, playing in a band, shooting, you know, going away, but then becoming a journalist, then a DJ. It's been commitment from the start, hasn't it?
Do you want to hear the bus story?
Oh, I can't wait. No, I want to know more about the bus. Marianne lived on a bus for music, so we're quite excited about listening to this.
Well, I'll try and distill it a little bit, but yeah, when I lived in Garstang, this is the village that I came from. There was almost no live music. Maybe once every 6 months, a live band would come to Garstang and play at an old working men's club. And I remember one day on the chalkboard on the wall, there was a sign that went up, and it said "Heretic from London." And I thought, this is it. This is my moment. I'm going to get a job with this band, and I'm going to move to London with this band. And anyway, I went to see them play, and to cut a very long story short, I did get a job with them. What I didn't understand at that time was that they had no money at all, and that they lived on a car park in a bus, 200 miles away from my home village at the time. But they said to me, if you can make us a backdrop, that's your challenge. If you can make us a backdrop, then we'll give you a job. A backdrop was, I don't know if you're all too young to probably remember what that was. It was like a vast piece of material that a band used to paint their logo on back in the day and hang behind them as they played. So I went to a local town called Preston, which is a little bit bigger than Garstang, and I found a material shop that had got reels and reels of old blackout curtain material from the war, still left over, yeah. So I bought the whole lot. And I painted Heretic's logo, which was a big sort of circular moon with an eagle in the center, rolled it all up, put it into a backpack, and just thought, I'm never coming back. This is it. And I didn't. And so we lived on a very kind of broken down old coach in a car park on the outskirts of London for a year, and we called the coach the Blue Goose Hotel. And the band and I all worked day jobs, so a couple of them were grave diggers, a few worked in a factory where dog dishes went past, and they would stick the stickers on the bottom of the dog dishes as they went past. Myself and the singer worked in a sweet factory, and they used to bring in these oil drums full of Maltesers, and our job was to fish out anything that looked like it might be able to be repackaged, and they would sell the secondary sweets, I guess, at some point. But we saved up all the money that we had earned from these day jobs to go on tour, because those were the days where you pretty much had to pay to play. You know, if you got half a lager and 5 straws, it was a miracle at the end of the night. And we lived together on that car park, saved all our money, got an issue of Sounds music paper, went through the back as soon as we'd saved up enough money to book a tour. And I did all kinds of things for them. I made their clothes, their stage clothes. I painted their record sleeves and designed those. I was their lighting engineer when we went out on the road. and I was also the bus mechanic. and I kind of cut a deal with him, and I said, look, if I can get a couple of extra jobs when we're off the road, like working in bars and stuff, do you mind if I take that money and make a fanzine? Because it was it was almost like a commune. It was like a small commune mentality. But I got their sort of approval to make the fanzine. And I made a couple of issues of a fanzine and then sent it to the editor of Sound's music paper, and with a letter saying, I live on a car park. I've had a year's experience with a band, and these are all the things that I can do. And I remember there was a very kindly computer scientist called Fez who lived up the road from us, and very occasionally he would allow us to have a bath at his house, which was like pure luxury. And he arrived at the bus one day and knocked on the door, and I thought, this is really bizarre. You don't usually see Fez till about 3 o'clock in the afternoon. What's he doing at 10 o'clock in the morning? And he handed me a letter from the editor of Sounds, and I couldn't believe it. I'd sent a couple of issues of this fanzine off to the editor of Sounds, and he wrote a letter saying, I think you better come in and see me. And so I did, and I went in and I had a meeting with him, and he said, what the fuck are you doing living on a bus? He said, how long have you been there? And I said, well, about a year. And I said, well, I thought I must have had to show you that I've got the appropriate experience, that I've worked for a band for a year, so I know what I'm doing. And he said, why didn't you just write a review and send it in to me like everybody else who's, a sane human being? And I said, well, I come from a tiny village. I didn't really understand what kind of route you could take into the music industry, so I just kind of made it up one step at a time. So that's the bus story.
That's incredible. But effectively, you've just had this crash course in the music industry. But back then, it was very. I remember it being very. It wasn't as connected, the world back in the 1980s, and you have to wait. As you said earlier, you had to wait weeks for records. You had to wait weeks to get a fanzine through the door. You had to really exploit the contacts that you had, because otherwise they were, nothing would happen. It would just be staring out the window, and that was effectively how it was. But then you got into the world of music journalism.
Yeah,
it was after that, wasn't it?
Yeah.
And then that was again another side to your activities, which effectively you're continuing now through the BBC, Six Music, and the rest of it. Another form of journalism, if you will.
Yeah.
What was it like making that step over to the other side? Was it?
It was weird. I tell you, it's odd when you have no fixed abode and you live on a bus or in a vehicle of some sort. And I would imagine if you're actually homeless, this is just an interesting thing for you to think about the next time you see somebody who's homeless. What's interesting is that you seem to feel more and more separated from society, and you drive along a road, or perhaps you walk along and you look at buildings and you see people walking around, probably doing very ordinary activities. I don't know, in those days maybe making a cup of tea or photocopying a piece of paper. And you wonder whether or not you'll ever be part of the type of community that operates inside a building ever again. So it was quite bizarre making that transition back into an actual, I say a former life, you can't really call it that, but just to begin working for Sounds. I was 19 years old at that point, but I remember one of the first jobs that they sent me on. They sent me to America, to Studio 54, and I remember driving over the Brooklyn Bridge. I still had no fixed abode at this point. And actually getting to the hotel, and they wouldn't allow me to check in because I didn't have I didn't have an address. I didn't have any bank details or any of the, the stuff that you would need to check into a very flash New York hotel. So I had to sit quite meekly in the foyer. And you couldn't ring anybody in those days either. No. You just, there were no mobile phones, there was no internet or anything. So I just sat there for, I can't remember. It was hours and hours and hours and hours until the record company the representative showed up to take us away. And he said to me, "Why have you not checked in?" And I said, "Well, I have no fixed abode. Somebody else bought the tickets for me." And but I wasn't able to use anything in the real world, as you would do. But it is a bizarre sense of I suppose, resurfacing in a place that you feel, I wonder if I'll ever move around with that species of human again, you know. It's weird.
That's obviously given you a completely different perspective on all the sort of the layers of involvement in the music industry. You know, you've gone right from the bottom, the car park, the journal, you know, the music journalism, which in the 1980s was very, very. I don't know if it's different, but it was certainly a different setup to it is now, and also the fact that you also seem to be, you know, then you moved into radio. How did you get into radio from the writing side to the radio side? Did you not interview someone? Was it Trevor Dunn? Was it?
Oh yeah.
This is BBC Radio. I was a boss of BBC Radio 1 at the time.
Yeah, he was. Yeah. There was a tiny little station. It was called XFM, and we were doing trial broadcasts for a month in London once a year. We did it for 5 years in a row before they actually got a license. And it was quite entertaining, really, because we literally thought we were changing the world. And we were broadcasting with about, maybe a 10-mile catchment in those days, because, again, there was no digital technology. So it was just a load of coat hangers on the roof, pretty much, I think, you know. But there was no form beyond John Peel's programme, really, of alternative radio in the UK at that point. So we really did believe that we were changing the world. We were changing the fabric of the media with XFM in those days. And I remember we were very lucky because we had the great patronage of many artists who really, really believed in what we were doing. And I was thrilled to bits because I managed to persuade Mudhoney to come in and do a live session on my show. So I was completely stoked. And anyway, the boss of XFM, a wonderful guy called Sammy Jacobs, came and tapped me on the shoulder and he said, you know that Mudhoney session that you sorted out? He said, we're going to bounce it to the following show. And I was like, whoa, hold on a minute. What are you talking about? You can't just do that. That's my session. And he said, no, the head of Radio 1, the head of production at Radio 1, Trevor Dann, wants to come in and he's going to play an hour of his favourite records on your show. And I was absolutely incensed because I said, look, Trevor Dann is the captain of a national BBC network. You know, if he wants to mess around and play an hour of his favourite records, surely there's a window of opportunity at his own station to do that. Why does he have to come to XFM? Anyway, we had a huge row about it, and the boss won. But I said, all right, he can only come and play an hour of his favourite records on my show if I get to interview him first. And these were the days of enemy journalism, which was much more acerbic and biting, I guess, in those days. So, to distill this, I had an extremely confrontational conversation with him. Unbeknown to me, he was brought in at Radio 1 as kind of a henchman, if you like, to get rid of a lot of the old guard of, you know, aging white male DJs with trout farms in Hertfordshire, you know, and bring in some young blood. And everyone at the BBC was petrified of him. So they were quite entertained by the idea that this young upstart was giving him such a hard time on the radio. And somebody had taped the interview and it was bootlegged around the BBC. And this particular cassette ended up on the desk of Matthew Bannister, who was the controller of the day. And he put it into his cassette player very famously, thinking that he was listening to some very elegant demos for new programs, and heard this crazy interview with me and Trevor, really, really confrontational interview, and basically rang Trevor and said, who is this girl? We need to get her. And that's how I got to Radio 1.
Just shows that if you stick to your guns and you speak the truth, you know, it sometimes does happen, you know. But a narrative I'm getting from this conversation is that you are very committed, and you're very much a case of, you know, if I'm going to do this, we're going to do it my way, or I'm going to do it in a way that isn't going to be, I won't say the word compromising or anything, but it is something that you don't see an alternative to doing it your way. You've always wanted to say, right, I'm going to live in a bus. I'm going to write. I'm going to make fanzines. I'm going to tell Trevor Dann to get stuffed. You know, it's always that seems to carry on. Is this determination to do it? I mean, was it very difficult, you know, back then in the sort of the 1980s to be this lass from the north of England with no journalistic training, no real sort of help from, you know, people behind you or a sort of a group of people. You did it absolutely on your own. I mean, how difficult was that?
It was relatively difficult. It was also very much a male-dominated industry in those days, and women pretty much had one role. You were a groupie or you were out. That was it. I remember begging a guy that I knew that ran a lighting company to train me as a lighting engineer, and he wouldn't even conceive of it, you know, because I was female. That's just how it was in those days, you know. But I could never really conceive of another life. I always thought, this is my life, I'm living it. And there's never really been a pathway that's been clear. It's just been a case of sort of seeing a chink of light and an opportunity and just charging towards that threshold and thinking, I need to get across to this, you know, to the other side of where that light is shining. And I've had a lot of luck, I've got to say. I've been really fortunate. But it's like you say, the struggle continues. If you want to broadcast on a daytime breakfast show, as I do at the moment, and play Colin Stetson and Nils Fromm, you know, the challenge continues. But I'm ready, you know. I'm probably not, I'm 53 years old now, so I'm probably not quite as confrontational as I used to be. And I don't feel it's necessary, but certainly in those days, it was a completely different environment, wasn't it?
Yeah, no, it was. And it was something that you felt it was unobtainable. There was no way of getting in. I think that's one of the great things about the internet, one of the possibly the saving grace of the internet, is the idea that you are able, you know, to be here because in many ways of the internet, there's you're able to move around, able to meet people. Back then, it was, you know, you'd send a letter, you'd never think you'd get a reply. I mean, people talk about, oh, no one ever replies to my emails. At least you're able, you know, to get hold of that contact, because you weren't, were you, back then? Yeah,
it's really true. I remember vividly one of the first gigs that I went to in London, and I was maybe about 14 or 15 years old, and Motorhead played at Hackney Dog Track. And I remember jumping the train because I didn't have any money. That means, like, jumping on without a ticket. But thinking I've got to see Motorhead. But I would have arrived at Euston Station. Hackney is some considerable distance. I've got no idea how I even found my way to Hackney. But then I arrived at this site. Unbeknown to me, the gig was run by Hells Angels. I'm 15 years old, completely alone. I get onto this field. There are no facilities whatsoever. There's no food, no drink, no toilets, no nothing. There's just Motorhead and a ton of Hells Angels. But for me, that was it was kind of like a do or die. It was a fight or flight experience. It's like, okay, this is either going to be the greatest moment of your life, or it's just going to go catastrophically wrong. But actually, it was one of the best afternoons of my entire life. And I remember thinking, even at that moment, I thought, oh my God, like, for the first time in my life, I was surrounded by people who I could identify with. You know, I thought maybe not so much the Angels, but the rest of the people who'd come to the site. Yeah. I thought there are other people like me in the world, and you can't conceive of what it felt like to be 14, 15 years old from a tiny village in the north of England with no internet, as you say, nothing to actually bring anybody together. When you finally do find people who have the same kind of interests as you, it's almost like a miracle. I remember thinking to myself, like, oh my God, now we're all going to have to go home. We've only just found each other. Why can't we just stay here and build a city and live here forever together, you know? But I don't know, I guess, you know, I'm a utopian dreamer.
It was, I have to chip in. I remember going to a gig in Manchester in about 1984 to see Echo and the Bunnymen. And again, I got the bus from Accrington to go and see Echo and the Bunnymen, and I'm there on the bus. And I got there, it's like, God, there's all these people with their hair stuck up and makeup and like long coats. Bloody hell, you know, people who are like me. And that was something that was that was the binding force. And effectively, in some ways, the internet has taken a lot of that and amalgamated that online, which is something to be very thankful for, really, on one level. But yeah, the rush of that, and then going home thinking, oh no, back to East Lancashire.
To hell. Yeah.
Talking of Motorhead, I mean, you were originally associated with a lot of rock music, and then you really got into electronic music. What was the big step between the punk and the rock, which you were really dived into. And then a lot of people know you for the DJ and the electronic side, you know, Sonar, DJ, and all these this sort of big step. What was it that infused that change? What was the thing that made you step into the electronic side?
It was the Hacienda, in one word, in Manchester. What was really interesting was that we were all living in London at the time, and I was writing for NME. But I don't know, maybe 6 of us would pile into a car every weekend and drive 200 miles up the M6 for a night out at the Hacienda, you know. But I remember crossing that threshold, which in and of itself was quite precarious too, because you'd queue up for a long time to get into the Haas. And then there was a really, really ferocious woman on the door, Fiona Allen. She went on to be a comedian in a really famous British series called Smack the Pony, which is brilliant. I fully recommend it if you've not seen it. Have a look at it online. But she would always let the regulars in, as you would, obviously, you know, and make the people who come from London stand to one side. And every time we went up there, we thought, oh, my God, are we going to get past Fiona, you know? But for me, I went there as a kind of scruffy punk, literally, with laces in the front of my jeans. And it was like stepping across a threshold into a completely different world. It was my first real exposure to electronic music, and especially music from those areas of America that I'd never really explored before. But it changed my life completely, and it began a sort of, I guess, a lifelong exploration of electronic music, and a great passion and a great love of it.
What is it? What is the essence of electronic music to you? What is the thing that makes you think that is the switch? You know, to use an electronic metaphor, that allowed you to make that transition. What is it?
It's hope, isn't it? Yeah. And it's progression. I think it's a form of music that is endlessly in step with the technological progress of the time, as obviously fused with the creative elements that artists bring to it uniquely themselves. But I love that it's right at the cutting edge all the time, you know, and the possibilities, the future possibilities are always limitless. It's the music of hope, I think.
It's something that allows you to detune your ears as well. The last sort of 10, 15 years has been things with dubstep and I think like hyperdub label. The idea that all these new beats that you'd never have considered, you know, even to be music. When you listen to something like Code 9, you're thinking, what the hell is going on? Well, you know, when you first listened to it. And I remember you've released 3 compilations. I have Evangeline. I remember thinking some of this. What? When I first heard that, I didn't know what was going on. I thought to myself, there's something wrong with my CD player. Because of this strange noise, I'm thinking, oh no, it got a new amp, you know, but it was actually the music on it. It is actually sort of detuned people's ears in many ways, hasn't it? It's actually really has opened other spaces up.
Yeah, completely. I think it's really interesting, my great love of that kind of expanse and that mystery in sound. I suppose you could peg all the way back to David Bowie and Subterraneans, which was my favourite track from the album Low. And I remember, before my dad found the album, sitting on the floor when I was a kid, playing Subterraneans over and over and over and over again, and just thinking to myself, I love that kind of expansive space that Eno built, but also the mystery in the lyrics that Bowie created for that track. And I thought as a kid, what's he trying to say to me? You know, if I can just decode this language that he's created, I'll get the keys to the gate. I'm so certain of that. But what's interesting is I interviewed him twice. And on both occasions, I decided not to ask him because, in a way, I feel like the childhood Marianne Hobbs knew that was her challenge, and it might take a lifetime to solve that mystery, but I like the mystery to just hang in the ether still. You know, I don't want to solve it like an equation. It doesn't need to be solved necessarily. But yeah, I think Eno's aesthetic from that very, very primary formative moment has travelled forward all the way through, as you say, maybe the early dubstep that I really adored, you know, Burial, Code 9, Pinch, Mahler, Digital Mystics, Loafer, the extraordinary music that Hessel Audio were making, and all the way through to, I mean, you hear it in the music of Nils Frahm now. You hear that amazing sense of mantra and space opening up in what Colin Stetson does in the same, well, I suppose interpreted in a unique way, but you see the parallels, they're there, you know. But yeah, that's where it would have come from, I guess. Subterraneans.
That's that, and again, it's we talked about determination earlier, but hearing this answer, it's also this massive sense of romance that you want to give out about the idea of music. You know, because of course, some people will now start. You talk about Nils Frahm. This crossover between the avant-garde, the classical, and the electronic world. This sort of interface that suddenly opened up in the last 10 years. Again, people take a very academic approach to that. A lot do, but you've come from this from a determinedly romantic angle. It sounds to me right now. Would that be also good? Is it the romance in music still as strong as ever for you? Yeah,
and I get beaten up a lot for that particular standpoint. Why? I don't know. I tend to really divide people's opinion, but you know, I don't really care about that either. I just think if you can't please all of the people all the time, and if you're trying to do that, you're way too passive. And I don't expect people to love my approach either. Not in every case. I can understand how it might really grate on some people, but it's coming from a place that's very honest, and it's coming from a place that's real and that's pure, and I can't dress it up another way, you know. I feel like there was a time when I was younger, when I was a writer, and when the sort of media domain, certainly that domain was very male dominated, when you had to become much more aggressive to be able to sustain your position at NME. And it wasn't, I could make an interpretation of that because the editor demanded it, but it wasn't really true to the character that I am. And I think now, I prefer to just reflect things as honestly and as truthfully as I can. And I'm quite prepared for some people to dislike that. You know, it doesn't trouble me.
Yeah, because that's something that you notice more and more, I suppose, in the milieu of music, the idea that everyone has to have an answer that's acceptable. Certainly in the idea of you know, when I read a press release or something, you see all the same words turning up all the time, you know. Yeah. I do like the idea of getting an email to someone, I'm living in a van. You know, I might actually listen to the record then, but the idea of that everything has an equation, you know, there's a sort of quantitative effect to answering the idea of music, but you're not really going to do that, are you? No. I'm going to go slightly off track now, again, figuratively. Motorbikes. Tell me about motorbikes, Marianne. Tell us the love of motorbikes. Where did that come from?
Yeah. Well, again, that goes back to living in a tiny village because obviously, well, you may or may not know this, but when you grew up in my generation, you had to be 17 years old before you could drive a car. And there was like, I don't know, maybe one bus to Blackpool or something at that point. But at 16, you could get a moped. And so at 16, I got a little 2-speed pooch moped and painted it black, as you do. And that was that was my emblem of freedom, because I could then go anywhere I wanted to at 30 miles an hour with a very strong tailwind. So, so it began there, and actually, in the village that I grew up in Garstang, that was a really interesting place in terms of biker culture, because there were 2 pubs who would welcome bikers, and so all of the satellite towns and villages, all of their biker communities would assemble in Garstang. You know, they'd congregate in Garstang, and so, you know, when I was just a kid, that was a very, very big part of my life. That was kind of the big thing that was happening in Garstang, you know.
The thing about bikers, though, bikers and music are always, you know, obviously there's a strong culture that we know about from the Anglo-American side, you know, the Hells Angels, obviously the Easy Rider, but it's also the idea that, I mean, the late great Mark E. Smith always mentioned the idea that the biker community is much more open-minded about music. Did you ever find that?
Yeah, absolutely.
Why was that?
Well, the first gig that I ever went to actually was a Thin Lizzy gig, and that was at Preston Guildhall, and that was entirely inspired by the music that I'd found in that biker community. But this is quite funny, actually. I went to that gig on my own, and I'd never been to a gig before, so I didn't really know what to expect. And I turned up at the time at which the doors opened, which was the time on the ticket, and I kind of took my place in the room, and then another band came on. And I thought to myself, oh my God, this is not Thin Lizzy. And I was looking at the ticket thinking, am I here on the right day? Am I in the right room? Dare I ask somebody what's going on? I don't understand this. And of course I didn't realise at that point that a band like Thin Lizzy would have a support band. Yeah. I just assumed that I must be in completely the wrong place for some reason. But anyway.
At least you didn't see the sound check. That would have really freaked you out, wouldn't it? You know, some guy go 1 2 1 2 and then disappearing at 8 o'clock.
Yeah.
But again, it's one of these things where the idea of communities that are always slightly outside the sort of the regimented, you know, societal norms are the ones with the sometimes most open minds. That's,
absolutely, yeah. I think you immediately get a sense of what outsider culture is, and if you grow up as part of those biker communities, they instill a sense of fearlessness in you. You know, they instill a sense of rejecting the very formal trajectory that you could take in life and just treading a completely different pathway, and actually giving you a sense that might be possible. Having said that, I mean, I would say it was a couple of glorious summers before people did then begin to fall away and begin to live more conventional lives. You know, people would get engaged and then say, right, okay, we're selling the bike, we need a house, this, that, and the other thing. But for a couple of glorious summers, yeah, it felt like anything was possible.
I'm going to sort of take this talk to a conclusion. And I had 2 questions I wanted, well, I actually got 3 things I want to talk about. But there's 2 questions I wanted to ask you, because I know, well, I hope I'm going to get an answer that's going to be like charging answer off here. And it's about the future. We've mentioned hope, we've talked about romance, we've talked about independence. And I thought to myself, one person I'd like to ask about the future, you're one of the few, I can imagine you saying, right, I've got a blueprint for 1 or 2 things. And I wanted to ask you 2 questions. What should change in the music industry? And what do you think will change? If we start with what should change, what are the things you should see changing in the music industry as a whole?
God, that's a really good question, isn't it? I think it's almost impossible to change the music industry as a whole. My focus would be always what you can do as an individual. And I feel the chaos effect is a good example of that, the butterfly effect. Nils Frahm is a great example of that in my case, an artist that I've championed for the last 5 years, who is now conceivably the biggest breaking artist in the world right now. Just because I discovered him and felt absolutely passionate that he had almost like a kind of magical gift. It's tangible if you ever see him play. And I don't perceive it as risk-taking at all. I perceive it as having a debate with other people around me as to why I believe this musician deserves the platforms that I've given to him. But as a consequence of that, you see almost the whole world, you see the passion in flame right across the world right now for Nils. And that's as a consequence of, again, this is maybe a bit too poetic, but it's a tiny butterfly, just me, with my wings trembling, thinking I found the most extraordinary artist. And I feel those are the ways that you change the world, really. And those are the ways that you can really change the music industry. Stand by what you believe in. Come hell or high water, and often it's a lot of hell and some considerably high levels of water, but you just have to go there. And it's amazing, actually, I think once people feel that passion and that commitment in you, you'll find it refracted from so many different sources all the way across the world. And I think if you believe in something, that's the most powerful fuel that you've got, really.
It's possibly what we've got left, isn't it?
Yes,
Really?
exactly.
You know, if we don't do that, we don't use that, we're not going to be able to do anything, are we? Effectively. I wanted, like, what do you think will change? You think nothing's going to change, but I mean, what do you mean by that? Is it a case of it's just going to carry on with the same old top-down structure, or people are always going to have this big idea of, say, the Anglo-American music industry being the dominant force, or is it? Do you think that's all those blocks are never going to move, or?
I think things change organically. Colin Stetson's another brilliant example of an artist that I've championed really passionately, who is now, you know, stepping up in the way that Nils has done, and I see him on the same kind of trajectory as Nils. And you know, when you try to explain to people, it's one guy on a piano, it's one guy on a saxophone, people are like, you know, whatever, Marianne, you know. But actually, I watch these things happening, and for me, it doesn't feel. It feels entirely righteous that actually these artists are getting the types of global platforms that they are. But I don't know. It's hard to. It's hard to quantify at a higher level. I'm kind of quite disinterested in big corporate institutions. You know, they are what they are. They're always going to be around. They're always going to suck the soul out of pretty much everything. We all know that, but we all know a ton of really passionate individual people who change the world every day, and I genuinely believe that that's actually where it really happens. You know.
Good answers. Honest. I was going to ask, well, the final thing is, like, do you know, I mean, do you have any, again, this is a bit putting you on the spot, and please tell me to politely go away, is the idea of, this region, is there anything that you know about, say, the Balkans, or this region in terms of music that has always grabbed you?
That's one of the most exciting things for me is coming here today, because I know when I play a little bit later on tonight, loads of people are going to come up to me with music that I've never heard before, and it's always one of the best places to find new music, because people will come to the shows when you're DJing live, and they'll pass you things, and they'll come all the way because they know that you're going to be there, and actually that's a way to stand out. You know, obviously I probably, like you, I get about 200 emails an hour, and I just physically can't get through everything. But when somebody's made the effort to bring you a USB stick or a CD to an actual gig and come and find you and give it to you by hand, that's the human element, isn't it? And it's so important, and I'm excited to think, I wonder what I'll discover when I get home tomorrow, that people will bring tonight. It'll be amazing.
You've really signed your own warrant there, haven't you? Everyone's going to, like, right, pocket, right, put that, you know, where's that promo CD. We've got a time for a couple of questions, if anyone wants to take a question from the floor. I see the gentleman. There's a young man here who wishes to ask a question.
You've got great hair, can I just say that?
Thank you for the compliment. Well, you've got a great voice, and I recognized it way back, and it was weird, you know. I just want to ask you about breeze blocks, because, you know, it was weird. I was 7 at the time breeze blocks came out. Yeah. It would be nice if I would be sort of able to, you know, listen to it back then. But I guess everyone has to evolve in that sense. It was just that one thing that I wasn't able to find the full breeze blocks show anywhere, except for the extremely good burial one with the mix at the end of it.
Oh, yeah.
So is there anywhere it's possible for me to, I mean, I'd listen to it every week as if I was living back then, you know.
Officially no, but actually, if
you see Mary Ann Waite.
Yeah, if you are you on Twitter?
I can make one.
Yeah, make one. Just tweet me. Actually, there's a guy called Rob Booth who runs a record label called Houndstooth, And he's recorded almost every single one. And I don't know where the archive is, but he would be able to point you in the direction of a few, I'm sure. So just tweet me and say, I met you in at MENT. And
Great
I want
hair.
to know about that. Great hair, yeah.
On
I
the
want
guy
to know
with the
about
hair,
the
yeah,
stuff.
yeah.
But he's on Twitter as well, so I'll just hook you up with him. And I think he's got almost every single one, which seems crazy, but he has.
I just, it feels like I missed a sort of a, I mean, every show is like I missed a piece, a very important piece of the evolution of music, you know. That's how I feel like.
But then, you know, we still listen to Mozart, don't we? And we're not living in 1752 or what have you, so don't worry. You know, we're still all catching up, I promise you.
Yeah, the world is yours now anyway. Take it, you know.
Anyone else? There's a gentleman there.
Yeah, see him.
I can see him.
Yeah.
I don't have a question, but I'm writing a love letter so that everybody can hear it now. No, I'm a promoter myself in Belgium, AB in Brussels. I actually played her dubstep set 3 years ago.
What was the venue?
I'm sorry?
What was the venue?
AB, it's called AB on
right,
in
yeah.
Brussels. So and it's as a promoter, I know it always costs a lot of money, even if you organize like a small show. And when I listen to the radio, it's just like there's so few people there to play really good music. When you listen to national radio in Belgium, everything is so safe and so on the safe side, and it doesn't cost a lot of money to play like a beautiful track. When you just book a band, even for 500 euros, it costed you like 2,000-3,000 euros on production costs. But so I never understand why people don't play good music on the radio, and you do so. And every time you play tracks on the radio, every time I say like to my girlfriend, like, I mean, in Belgium you would have been sacked already if you play a Carl Stetson or Niels Frahm track. So that's.
1 second, sir. Have you heard Dutch radio?
It's even worse, yes, I know.
Believe you me, Belgium
it's
is
just
seen
like-
as a guiding light.
But it's like you just play the track. It only costs you like a couple of POS for BBC Radio 6 to play it. So it's important that you keep on doing this kind of stuff, and that it's you really hear it. It comes from your heart and from your soul. So that's so
you.
far my love letter.
That's so kind.
so
Thank you
respect.
very much.
Am I on? Yeah, cheers. Just coming back to you, mate. I got a couple of cassette recordings of the show. Okay, I can share with you.
Oh, nice one.
Yeah, I was 17 when you were 7, and I come from Budapest, Hungary, and we used to listen to your show religiously every week on
thank
cable
you.
radio. It's a big thing for my musical sort of evolution. My question is. Apart from the stuff you do, and that's been sort of subject to this discussion, what are your tips for 2018 musically? What gets you excited nowadays?
2018. Okay. Do you know about Andrea Belfi yet?
No.
Okay. So if Nils does piano, Colin does saxophone, Andrea does drums. Now try selling that one in. It's a guy in a set of drums, but actually it isn't. So imagine he's kind of just beginning with these ideas that actually you can create, and has done, an entire solo album using rhythm as a centerpiece. And he is absolutely remarkable as a live musician. I went to see him play a show, one of his first shows in London very recently, and if you're into that kind of vibe, Andrea, the other really fascinating artist that I love at the moment is a guy called Abel Mogard. Now, there is a fable about Abel, and the fable goes like this, that he is from Serbia, and he is a retired factory worker, and he only began making music at the point at which he gave up life in a factory, and that he built his own synthesizers and a lot of his own equipment to try to recreate some of the drone and some of the atmosphere, the texture, the noise of the factory. People dispute that to me. People have said to me, that's a lie, it's Code 9. So I emailed Code 9 and said, I don't think this is you. And he said, it's not me, but I love it. Thank you very much for hooking me up. But I've talked to him quite a lot. He did an extraordinary guest mix for me the last time I was sitting in on Giles Peterson's show, and I had an opportunity to commission a few mixes. And I said to him, Tony Wilson from Factory Records always used to say, you know, if there's a choice between truth and legend, go for legend every time. And I said to him, I don't actually care who you are, but I love the character that you've created, if it is a character, and I think you should remain in character to deliver the music that you do, because the character is perfect in terms of the way that it correlates with the music that you make. Colin Stetson talks about working with Tom Waits, actually, and he said the most interesting thing that Tom Waits taught him was that actually he'd always approached the saxophone with a sense of self and a sense of ego, meaning not big ego, but ego meaning a sense of self as he played the instrument. Tom Waits talked to him and said to him, actually, you can create an entirely separate character, and you can play in character as an actor would on a particular track, which is why you hear the saxophone on Alice, which Colin did of the Tom Waits track, which just sounds so different. I explained this to Abel Mogard, and I said to him, I think, I don't know. Nobody has actually presented the real Abel Mogard to me, so I don't really know. But nonetheless, the character is so profound and so powerful, I think you should retain it, whoever you are. And I don't actually even want to know. I love the mystery, I love the I love the romance. You know, I don't care about the truth. So, but he's worth checking out as well.
Okay, cool. Thanks.
He did my favorite remix that came out towards the end of last year, which is a track by Fovea Hex, which is 24 minutes long, and it's just remarkable. So yeah, check him. Just a couple of things.
Abul Magad, and what was the name of the drummer?
Abul Magad and Andrea Belfi.
Andrea Belfi's great. You really have to see him live. It's absolutely something else.
Yeah. Yeah, he is. Yeah. He is.
This is really getting like a black market in here, isn't it? We are selling off tapes.
He
and
is Italian.
It's
Yeah.
good stuff. Yeah.
He's based in Berlin, but he's Italian. But he is gonna really fly.
Yeah.
Trust me. His album is called Ore. If you're writing that down, O-R-E. Yeah. Check it out.
We've got time for one more question. Monsieur.
Yeah.
Oh, well, okay. I tell you what. All right,
Yeah.
we'll try and do two if we can be quick.
Yeah. All
Yeah.
right. Yeah. Sorry, I'm rambling on. No. I do tend to ramble.
Hi, I'm David from Budapest, and I want to know, what do you think about the state of music journalism nowadays? Like the age of streaming?
Music journalism.
Just the age of streaming and the age of, social media. Is it as relevant as was in the 80s
Yes.
or 90s? What do you think of it?
Of course it is.
Yeah. Well,
I'm really interested.
music journalism. Well, again, it comes back to the individual. It depends who's writing the piece. You know, everybody's a journalist these days. Everybody publishes every thought, every waking moment of the day. But actually, the Quietus, big up, I've got to say, and Louder Than War, extraordinary blogs. And I think, again, it comes down to the individual architect of the piece and your relationship with that person as a reader. And, the integrity and the credibility of what that person is trying to communicate to you. It doesn't also matter, again, if you agree or not. If the person's making a really, really fascinating point, it's always really interesting to take that on board, I'm happy for people to criticize me as long as it's valid. What I dislike is character assassination, which people seem to be entirely free and happy to do. If people have got a valid point, I think fair enough, I'll take that on board, But yeah, to return to journalism, it depends entirely upon the writer. But I think the Quietus is one of the most really, really valuable resources anywhere online in the world right now. So long may they reign.
Thanks for that. John, if you're filming this, send it to John Doran, can you please? Thank you. And also I'll add Drowned in Sound for that as well. I think they're a great paper. We've got
Drowned in Sound.
for
Yeah,
sure.
absolutely. Yeah.
Stefan.
Hello, I'm Stefan from Moscow. I actually worked at the club when you came over 7.
Oh my God, the one that was
8,
underground.
Yeah.
Oh wow,
Yeah.
this was a bunker in Moscow. That was kind of quite scary, wasn't it, that night?
Well,
You have
I
to
was
go
working
out.
there. It wasn't scary for me, but
In a fascinating way, though.
It was
You have
actually
to
very
go-
funny. We worked only 3 months, but made a big fuzz in that.
It was brilliant. You go down a tiny tunnel. It's a bunker for war, isn't it? You know.
It's just a basement of a building that was I have no idea. It was a weird place.
It was strange.
We closed down because we got fooled by the owner.
Yeah.
None of us ever got paid.
Yeah. It was great though. It was such a good night.
Yeah. I actually have a weird probably question. What do you think about Gcom, this electronic music kind of genre from Durban, and about all these, let's say Gcom, and about actually these music from Africa, new electronic music from Africa, new genres. How do you think, is it gonna evolve? Is it the new, like, kind of...
Oh, Gom, you mean? Yeah, okay. So, yeah, those kids from Durban, they're amazing. Yeah. Domino is probably my favourite of all of those. He's absolutely incredible. And I got him to do a mix on my Six Music Recommend show a couple of years ago, actually. But, yeah, I mean, it's wild when you see what they're working with. They've got absolutely... just literally, you know, the bones of what it is that they're working with in technological terms. It's so raw, but actually the way that they're infusing all of the tribal rhythms into that music, it feels so exciting to me. I'd love to be able to bring them over to the UK. I mean, I really, really would. I've talked to a couple of festivals about actually bringing a whole crew to come and DJ, but yeah, I've got so much respect for them. I think they're incredible, and long may they, and high may they fly. And I'm hoping it's quite a mission to bring people from there as well. I think the visas are a nightmare, which is why we weren't able to do it. I was looking at that for Manchester International Festival, but it's quite a mission. But yeah, they're phenomenal. Do you love them too?
Yeah, I absolutely love it, and I think that, you know, in our days when we're experiencing waves like the third wave of techno, fourth wave of house, and it's all like coming. And in rock music, it's even worse. So, you know, it seems like we're in a circle and gonna listen to the same music for forever. And this music from Africa, it's just like absolutely, it's like it's from outer space.
There's also a lot of Portuguese, Lisbon-based DJs who also are very, very active in that scene. And again, that hopefully in terms of the visa issue, because we book them at Worm, we get a lot of people in from at Worm with the whole Lisbon scene. And again, that's very much from Mozambique and, you know, the former Portuguese colonies. And there's as anyone who goes to Lisbon would know, there's a very big African community there. And yeah, we get them into Rotterdam. So I think, Stefan, I think you should be all right. I think you should.
You know, when Europeans hear the word visa, it's like, oh, it's like the end. But, you know, we have to experience visa problems in Russia all the time, and there's still 5.
That's why you're living in that bunker, isn't it?
5 Russian bands playing on MENT, you know, this year.
That was a great night, though. I remember it really vividly. It was fantastic. It was really good. I remember asking the driver on the cab back to the airport. I'd never seen Red Square, and he's like, "We've got to go straight to the airport." I said, "Please." I begged him to stop, and he said, "You've got 10 seconds to run out." And so I ran into the middle of Red Square, just literally spun around and came back to the car. But yeah, I won't forget that night. It was amazing.
Yeah, I mean, you know, we can bring you over and show you all again. No big deal.
Do I get a commission for all these trade deals that are going off in here? It'll be about 4%.
4% from what?
Okay.
You know,
Yeah,
we're
just
poor
quickly
as
though,
hell.
Have a look online, because there's a half-hour mix that Domino from GOM did for me a couple of years ago, which is really killing. It's fantastic. I think it was 2016 he did that mix for me, and it was just incendiary. It's so brilliant. Check it out. I'm sure it's still on the Six Music website somewhere. I'll find a link for it for you.
Okay.
Tweet me.
I also have to make a Twitter, but I'll do that for you.
Yeah, cool.
So, well, that's it.
Thank you so much.
Oh, no.
Really enjoyed that.
Hang on.
Thank
on
you.
the floor.
Shut up.
Marianne Hobbs.